this is my opportunity to actually play this part. I don't want to feel like I'm auditioning for something that might happen later. I want to feel like I'm fully doing it now.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Cortman-Westfall, a Broadway music director, voice coach, and tenured professor in the musical theater department at the University of Michigan.
And I'm Chelsea Wilson, a performer turned voice teacher to Broadway stars and vocal coach on Broadway productions like The Phantom of the Opera, School of Rock, and more.
Here on the Broadway Vocal Coach podcast, you can expect real talk about the business, practical advice, and constant encouragement.
We believe there is space for every artist in this industry. All you need is the right support. So consider us your two-woman hype team. Welcome to the Broadway Vocal Coach podcast, where we help musical theater performers get unstuck and take the next step in their career.
Hi, everybody. Today we are so excited to welcome to the podcast Olli Haaskivi. Hi, Olli.
Hi, Cynthia. How are you? And Chelsea.
Great to have you here. We're so thrilled.
We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Today we're going to be talking about all kinds of things not necessarily related to musical theater. So let me tell you a little bit about Olli and then what we're going to be talking about today. Olli started with a degree in musical theater, but then pretty quickly transitioned into TV and film. He can currently be seen in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. He's playing the role of Edward Condon. He will also be seen in a recurring role on Apple TV's The Big Cigar. He's got a feature coming out called The Shallow Tale of a Writer Who Decided to Write About a Serial Killer. He's also originated roles in off-Broadway shows such as Bella, The Rafa Play, and Who's Your Baghdad, or How I Started the Iraq War. And his recurring and guest starring roles in TV and film include Winning Time, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, The Sinner, The Deuce, Mr. Robot, and Manifest. There's some of my favorite shows in there. Olli, one of my favorite guest roles that I've seen you do is actually on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I can't believe that is not on your bio because it's one of my favorite parts that I've seen you do.
I feel like I'm easy to miss on that one. I think that feels to me like a role that I don't know made any impact. So that's nice to hear.
Wow. Well, it made an impact on me. I feel like that was a pretty big.
I'll take it.
Pretty big spot on that episode.
It was one of those funny ones where I heard a lot of rumors about coming back at various points, and Marvin never showed up again. But
wow, well, I felt as if he lived in perpetuity on that series. Once you made an appearance, it was as if he was there all the time.
That's so nice.
It was a lasting impact.
I really did love that part.
Thank you so much. I loved it. It was fun to do. I loved being with Jane Lynch. She's so amazing. And that was one of those shows that I had auditioned for. I mean, I had a callback for the pilot years ago. I auditioned for probably 15, 20 parts on that show before I got the part that I ended up playing. And so that was one of those that was like, finally. My auditions for the longest time for that show were me and Alex Wise and Ethan Slater. And it would always be the same bench of boys being like, one day we're going to get these parts.
Oh, I love that.
And they ended up on the same episode in the final season.
That is
wild.
Oh,
really? That's great.
It comes around. It comes back around.
This is what we want to talk about today is transitioning from musical theater and or if you're a musical theater performer, how you can start to add some of this work into your portfolio of artistry. So can you tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from musical theater into TV and film and more straight plays rather than musicals?
Yeah, it's funny. It's been on my mind because I knew we were having this conversation. And I don't know in hindsight that it started as I'm going to take a hard turn away from musical theater. I think when I moved to New York City, I think that I had a sense that I loved doing musical theater. I was interested in musical theater. I still care about musical theater. But I think I felt aware that there are also straight plays and there are commercials and there are films and there are TV shows. And I think the initial impulse was just to investigate a little bit of all of it and kind of cast my net as wide as I could. I think that's really how it began. Also because at the time I graduated from college, 2008, it was kind of the beginning of a bunch of things shooting in New York City that had never shot there before. Because for the longest time, it really was like you go to LA for film and TV and you go to New York to do the theater. And that was really starting to change 2008, 2009, 2010. And so I think I was just sort of like, well, if there's more work, I should learn what that's all about. And so I think it just sort of started from that. I don't think the initial idea was some big old pivot.
I'm curious about the specifics because, I mean, for myself as a musical theater graduate, I graduated in 2012. And so around this time too, I feel like access to getting into that space is so different than access for auditions for musical theater, right? Like
Sure.
you can show up and wait in line and be seen for a musical in New York City, but it's kind of a different thing for TV film. So yeah, I want to hear
We
the
got
scoop.
time.
Give me the scoop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I remember I just had a flash that one of my first auditions after our college showcase was to be a pretty big lead of a pretty big film. And I just remember going, "Oh, I don't what are they doing? What do I know about any of this?" And then I remember getting callback after callback after callback for that film that I didn't end up getting. I don't think the film even got made in the end. But I remember very early on that planted some sort of seed of there might be something over there. And I remember feeling comfortable and I remember the work I did getting a good response. And so I think that put something in my head a little bit that there might be something over there to explore, but I was still initially very focused on musical theater because that was the thing that I felt most comfortable doing. I understood that the best, etc. But from day one, there was something brewing in terms of, oh, remember that thing you got called back for a bunch? That was fun. And I sort of started to notice slowly but surely a pattern where auditioning for musicals, I think that musical theater can often feel like if you're not exactly one of these four slots, we don't really know what to do with you. And I'm a little bit of a couple of those different slots depending on the day. And so I remember feeling like anytime I would audition to replace anyone in anything, there would often be something nice where they'd say everyone thought he was great or whatever, but he's a little different than the person he'd be replacing, so we can't work with him on this. And I felt like as time went on, I felt like I was kind of beating my head up against a wall a little bit. Whereas when I would get little auditions that my agent could get me for like a line on a TV show or three lines in a movie or something, no one had ever played those parts before. And so there was much less of a template in someone's head that needed to be matched. And so I remember feeling like there was just a difference in how I was being received in a room where maybe in a musical, oftentimes they might like me, but feel like it can't go any further because I wouldn't fit the costumes or I'm a little different than so and so who had originated it. Whereas in a TV and film audition, I felt like there was a little bit more, oh, that might be different than what we imagined, but maybe it can also be this. And also, I should mention it ties into 99% of my theater career has been new plays and new musicals, I think for the same reason. I wasn't setting out to do anything different. I'm only trying to play the parts as honestly as I can. But there was, over time, a very clear difference in how I was received over here versus how I was received over there.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me about like being able to be seen for really how you are and like who you are in those rooms is kind of what I'm hearing, and not having that lens of, yeah, who's done this before? Who is he replacing? That's fascinating to me. If we kind of go back to the beginning of your career here, you said you had an agent who was helping you get these auditions and whatnot. But how does that work in the difference between, trying to get seen for some of these small breakthrough parts in TV and film versus new plays, new works, theater stuff? in New York? Were you always going through your agent? Were there opportunities for you to forge relationships on your own in that space? What did that look like for you?
I think it looked like a little bit of all of it. It sort of ties into what I mentioned before, that maybe my mindset is always some version of like, let me just try a little bit of everything and see what comes back. And so I did allegedly have an agent right out of school. That had its ups and downs, but I was also going to open calls, and I was going to studios where casting directors would teach classes, and I was doing student films that I got on Actors Access. I was really just trying to see. I think if you just try a bunch of stuff, some version of a path will emerge just based on what you like and what you don't like, or where you feel like people are responding to you, or where you feel like they're not responding to you. And so I also paid attention to one of the people that I signed with initially right out of school left that agency pretty quickly. And so I think I stayed with that agency for a little while, but it wasn't the people I signed with, so they were a little less excited about me. And so I was kind of keeping my eyes and ears open for what are the agencies that seem to have access to the smaller parts on TV shows and in films, because I remember a couple years into it feeling like, okay, well, because of that initial round of auditions and because of where I went to college, it seems like many of the theater people know where to find me if they need me. And like you said, there are open calls you can go to. It's not that hard to wheedle your way in to a theater audition or two. But I felt like I don't have access to TV and film auditions quite as easily. So, what are the agencies that I'm hearing about that have that access? And specifically for the sort of smaller entry level roles, because I did feel like I really liked the idea of sort of working my way up the ladder, playing teeny parts and learning as much as I could. I didn't want, nor did I feel qualified to be the lead of my own TV show right off the bat. I was very happy to round up as many little things as I could just for my own education.
I'm curious if at some point in your career you felt like, okay, I've got a handle on this. I've racked up quite a few of these parts on my resume. Like, I'm ready for the next thing. I'm ready to audition for Christopher Nolan. I mean, like, how do you get from one line on a sitcom to being in 2023's like biggest film? So, like, was there a point where you felt like, okay, yeah, this is my path, and I'm really gonna fully commit to it at this point?
Yeah, I do remember, it's easy to say this stuff in hindsight, but I do remember a sort of like day it all changed was I had an audition for the USA television series Royal Pains. And about an hour later, across the street, I had my 12th or 13th audition for a big musical that I probably shouldn't name specifically. And I remember feeling such a difference in being at that Royal Pains audition, thinking, I feel really comfortable here. I feel confident. I feel like I know how to give you something that you will be happy with. And then an hour later, right across the street, sitting in this hallway, going, I don't know what you people want from me. I don't think you know what you want from me. I don't like being here. I should have been in this show. If I was going to be in this show, I should have been in this show 2 years ago or whatever. And I remember consciously sort of realizing, cool, so I think I'm going to go over there with those guys, and maybe you guys will never call again, and that's fine in the musical side. And at that point, I'd probably been on television once or twice, but that was the beginning of me starting to sort of actively pass on theater opportunities in favor of television and film, because there is an interesting calculation that needs to be made where, with television, more often than not, this week they're casting the episode that'll shoot next week. And so you kind of have to be in town, you kind of have to be available. And if you want to be fostering those relationships with the casting offices, you can't just keep leaving town to do theater all the time. And so there was a process, there was a moment where I went, okay, we might have to quit the other stuff cold turkey for a little bit in favor of staying in town so that you're available to audition for these things as much as you can, even if you're not working, but becoming one of the people that they know to call. And that was a sort of slow and steady building of something. For example, I think I auditioned for Royal Pains 20 plus times and was never on that show. But
Wow.
auditioning for it that many times early in my career really taught me how to audition for television. And I would be in that office week after week after week. They kept calling. There was a moment where I realized, oh, well, doing this play for 4 months means that's 4 months of TV and film opportunities that I can't jump on. And if that's the side of my career that I'm really trying to build up, going to Denver for 4 months doesn't really make sense anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. I appreciate what you're saying about wherever your priorities lie. At some point, there's a bit of a choice to be made. I think there's plenty of theater people who are doing both. You know, they're doing some commercial stuff here, they're doing some TV stuff here, but it's fascinating to hear though that you had that moment of this is definitely where I would rather invest my energy. So here's what it's going to take for me to get to that next level. At least that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, I think I realized somewhat early on that I think for most actors in New York City, when an episode of something comes up or when a little part in a film comes up, that's sort of like a weird bonus for them on top of the theater stuff they do. And I think I just realized, oh, I think I want to have the opposite setup where I want to mostly do this other thing, at least for this moment, and focus on building that up. And then when the theater stuff shows up, if and when it does, that'll be the sort of more grueling vacation from trying to be on TV shows and in films.
I'm so curious about, you mentioned that you learned so much from was it Royal Pains that you auditioned 20 times for? What did you learn over that course of, because this was early on, right? When you were first sort of starting out, what did you learn in those
Super
20
early.
auditions?
I mean, I think I just learned the rhythm of those auditions often come up at the very last minute for a job that will start shooting in 3 days. You need to prepare as if, I think for television, especially for the sort of guest star world, I think you need to sort of show up as the person that would be shooting their close up that day. I think you need to be that prepared. I think there's not a ton of time to direct people on a set that's shooting 7 or 8 pages every day and doing 8 days an episode. And so much of that auditioning is showing up and going, I'm ready to do this right now. Your set might literally be the room next door, and I can walk and deliver this exact thing right there. And so I think just getting in the rhythm of the same way that I was very used to auditioning with my binder of songs, and that felt like something I understood very easily. I think it was just a different permutation of that where, you get an email from your agent at 5:30 that says tomorrow you're auditioning for Neil on Royal Pains, who has these two scenes, learning those two scenes and showing up at the office and not feeling like you're auditioning for something, but feeling like you're giving as full of a performance as you can. I think just having as many times up at bat, because I think a lot of actors that are theater trained predominantly, as most actors are, I think it's very easy to freeze up in front of a camera. And I think the only way to stop doing that is to get as much exposure as you can. And so I think it was just a version of that going in time and time again and just getting more and more comfortable in that particular situation.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit more about showing up as that character or showing up ready to go? I'm curious how much direction you get or how much sort of backstory you get for some of these very small 1 or 2 or 3 line characters. What will you know about a character ahead of time? Or do you really have to make a strong choice and be imaginative and sort of show them an option? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Totally. And I think it's hard to generalize about only because every situation can be different. But I do think that particularly on a comedy television show, I think that there is a lot of room for, there are people on 30 Rock that said 2 lines that I remember so vividly because of how strange and amazing and creative they were. I auditioned for the show Girls a lot, is another one that I auditioned for plenty and never was on. But all of those characters had room for something sort of idiosyncratic or something sort of strange, and it felt like oftentimes you would walk into an audition to play the barista who has 3 lines, and a casting director would go, "Well, I don't know what they want for this." And I would say something like, "Well, I came up with a bunch of different ways it could go." And they would go, "Cool, let's just tape all of them." Because then they're able to show to their director or their producers, "Oh, here's someone who can do it this way, that way, and the other." And I think that that's how I ended up getting plenty of jobs, was through my work showing some version of like, well, it seems like he'll be fine no matter what we throw at him. Because the casting director is also often operating under limited information. And so helping them out as much as possible is the name of the game. And I also think that on a television set in particular, there's so much happening all day, every day. And they don't want to direct you if they don't have to. And so
Mhm.
if you can, through your audition, show, I can show up and you're not going to have to worry about me, I think that's one of the main things. Whereas in a theater audition, if people are being generous, they can go, "Oh, well, we've got 4 weeks with this person. We can craft something and we can mold something." Whereas I think television in particular is sort of like show up and hit it and get out of there, which is its own kind of skill, I suppose.
It really is. You're showing up as the solution to their problem. Yeah.
Mhm. And I'm curious how you learned that coming out of a musical theater program because, like you said, in theater, we're used to being given weeks of rehearsal where we have a director and a choreographer, and people really help you shape a performance. You don't necessarily come into an audition exactly the way you're going to be on opening night. Sometimes that shifts radically as you get into rehearsal. But when you have not necessarily a director who's going to direct you on your 3 lines as the barista, and when you're shooting in 3 days,
Mhm.
and when you have nothing el how did you learn how to walk in an audition room and make strong choices like that?
That's a really good question. My initial instinct, as far as a response to that very good question, is that for good or for bad, I think I was already doing that in my theater auditions. I think that might have been what people were not responding to.
Well, we hope all of our musical theater people are.
Yeah, this
Yes,
is what
I
we
hope so
hope.
as well.
We hope all our musical theater people are making
Strong
big
choices,
choices.
friends. Strong choices. Every musical theater actor knows make a strong choice, make a choice, make a choice. But still, I can imagine me, and I never auditioned for any TV film or anything like that, but I can imagine me walking in for years to TV and film auditions and just like hoping someone gave me some validation, hoping someone would tell me what to do. You know what I mean? I just think like maybe that's some of my personality too. Like someone just tell me, help me out here.
Sure.
Like, am I doing the right thing? Right. So I love that that was your instinct already. And I'd guess when you get 20 phone calls to come in for a certain television show, you realize, oh, okay, well, whatever I'm doing, which is just coming in with a different wacky choice every time, that has to be working, right? Like that's probably the validation as part of that process, right? Like, oh, I keep getting called in by this office. Something's
Right.
going right.
And I guess that my feeling about auditioning, regardless of the medium, has always been, this is my opportunity to actually play this part. I don't want to feel like I'm auditioning for something that might happen later. I want to feel like I'm fully doing it now.
Mm,
And so I think that that lent itself nicely to auditioning for television and film, where you could make the argument that it's more imperative, even in that medium, that the audition is a full performance because the job might be tomorrow morning.
yeah.
And so I think it might just be an area where my general feeling about auditioning lined up well with what works for you in this other scenario. Because I'm thinking even back on some of my earliest auditions when I was 22 years old, I remember really noticing a difference in how I felt when I was fully giving myself over to a story and a role, or even just a song I was singing, as opposed to sort of halfway doing that, but also saying, "Is this okay with you guys? Sorry about all of it." I think that the difference in how I felt was so palpable, and I had way less regrets when I walked in and felt like, "Here's how I would fully do the part, either you need it or you don't." And I'm happy to adjust, obviously, and I wanna work with a director. I value that relationship so much, but I noticed that I had a better time, and I felt like it was a more valuable experience to have with my time on this earth, to fully feel like I played this part even though it was a 4-minute audition, as opposed to, again, just kind of like asking for permission the whole time in this wishy-washy way.
Yeah. I love how you said that. I'm curious if we could transition to talking about you coaching other folks to do this now. That's a major part of how you spend your time and what you're doing in your career is coaching other folks to make this transition and helping them work on sides and scenes and whatnot. When did you decide to make that part of your repertoire of career things? And what do you like about that as well, coaching other people in this space?
It was largely by accident. I had, for the entire time I lived in New York City, helped my friends with their auditions and jobs in the way that we all kind of help each other. And for a very long time, friends of mine had been saying, "This needs to be your job. You should be getting paid for this." And I didn't understand what that would look like. I believe that acting is nebulous and unquantifiable, and I didn't understand how or why I would position myself as someone that understood it in some special way, much less figured out how to make a business out of that. And I would say that 2 things happened. One, I was able to sort of reframe it in my head and think, "Okay, well, there is something to the fact that your friends who have Tony Awards or have their own TV shows or whatever always want you to be the person that helps them with stuff. That's not nothing. And maybe you don't have to know a bunch of answers, but at least you can ask some good questions from time to time." And then, purely practically speaking, I decided to live alone in a studio apartment and went, "Oh, that's interesting. How are you going to pay for that?" And went, "Okay, now you have
Asking
to
yourself the hard
do
questions.
a very hard." I remember where I was when I hung up the phone. It was like, "I'll take it." And then it was like, "That's a weird choice you just made."
Oh, interesting, interesting.
But when, "Okay, now you have to do the thing that everyone has been telling you to do for a very long time." And I was so surprised, and I continue to be surprised by it. Took off very quickly, and I really love doing it. I think it's so fun. I think it's really helped me, and I'm sure both of you feel this way as teachers. I think it's really valuable to have to articulate what you believe. I think that's really a very good exercise for anybody, probably. I think it's made me a much better communicator with the directors I work with and with the writers that I work with, because I have to articulate these thoughts all day, every day now. Whereas I remember in the past, I would be on set or I'd be working on a play or something, and some director would have a conversation about a scene, and I would just have some sort of panic response conversation. And now I think I'm much better equipped to go, "Oh, well, I actually thought it was X, Y, and Z for these reasons, but great, you're saying it's B, D, and F or whatever." And that's been an amazing benefit. But it really is, it doesn't feel, and I'm curious to know if you 2 feel this way with the teaching that you do, it doesn't feel all that separate from the actual acting job that I also have. I do feel like it's kind of all in the same circle. It doesn't really feel like there's this and then there's that over there.
I love that answer.
It's been a huge surprise in my life. It was not my plan at all, and I'm so thankful for it for so many reasons.
It's also fun, isn't it, when your clients start to see success based on work that they've done with you? Not that you, as a teacher, ever take full credit for anything, because people always have multiple
Of course.
inputs coming in, is how I always feel. But it's still fun. Anytime you work with someone and you
Oh my God.
see a successful moment or something come to fruition, it's a different level of satisfaction, I think, or a different kind of satisfaction than when it's even yourself. There's something really special about that, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I have coaches that I work with and teachers that I work with, and so I know those relationships from both sides, and I know how important they are in so many ways. And so I think I have a much better understanding now as I'm getting older too about the fact that it is a craft that gets passed down to people, and not even necessarily as a teacher and a student, but as the directors you work with and the actors you work with and all of these things. And I think as I'm getting older, I'm not the youngest person around anymore. And so through coaching, I am realizing, oh, you are now a person who is passing this down in a certain way, the way it was passed down to you by Cynthia and by all of these other extraordinary people that I've gotten to work with.
I love that a lot. I'm curious, Olli, when you're working with a client, if there are certain things that come up again and again, and you're like, if I could just impart these handful of tips, everyone's TV and film auditions would vastly improve. Are there just some blanket statements you can make that you see as you work with folks, and of course from your own experience?
I honestly think the thing I probably say the most coaching someone is something along the lines of, those ideas are really good, you can go further with them. I think that's maybe most often the sentiment that I'm articulating to somebody, because it's rare that you see somebody completely misread something. It's rare that you see someone do the opposite of what is written or something like that. I do think what you see, and I'm sure you both see it all the time too, is a performance, and I've given plenty of these performances, so I know, that is 81% as committed as it could be. And sometimes, more than sometimes, I think oftentimes the thing I'm doing is attempting to make someone comfortable enough, or attempting to give someone the permission to use words that are kind of annoying to use, to fully turn up the dial on the thing and go for broke in whatever way that can go for broke. And in terms of TV and film specifically, I think that I think you can be a lot smaller on stage than people think you can be, and I think you can be a lot bigger on camera than people think you can be. And I also think that there's a school of thought in auditioning for television and film sometimes, but also theater, now that we're auditioning for so much theater on tape, that if I set up my eye lines perfectly and if I have the prop and I handle it perfectly, then that's a good audition. And I think that it's backwards. I think that I see people from time to time that maybe got trained in a certain way or have just certain ideas in their head independently, that is some sort of audition checklist of eye lines and props and costumes and all these things. And sometimes I go, cool, but you're not being a person in a scene. You're just sort of checking these boxes off. And I think that, to say something that sounds sort of high-minded, maybe, the only thing I'm interested in as an actor or as a teacher is, what does this look like when it's happening in real life, period. I think that's actually basically the definition of the job exclusively. And I think that all of the other stuff, the eye lines and the props and whatever, pretty much takes care of itself when you are fully immersing yourself in whatever situation you're supposed to be immersing yourself in.
I'm nodding my head so hard as
Yeah,
you're saying
me
this.
too.
Like, yes, yes.
That was so
Just
well
commit.
said.
Just
That was
commit. It's true for
described
everything.
so
Yeah.
beautifully and so succinctly. Thank you for that. That was really well said.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do see that come up a pretty good amount where the priorities get misplaced maybe a little bit.
I think maybe that's something that freaks out a lot of musical theater performers is this idea that who knows where we get it from, or like you said, if it's just something we made up for ourselves, that it's like a whole different technique to be on camera, to be on film. And there are absolutely technical things that you got to know. And like you said, like showing up to set for the first time, you don't know how to be on set until you're on set for the first time. Like there's so much of that. But acting is inhabiting a character and making choices about that character and committing to what, like you said, what is that moment like as if it were in real life? That's what we're depicting. And I think, yeah, I think sometimes that like, oh, I've gotta do it exactly like this with and look here and then look there and then look down and look up is like that's not the job. That actually isn't the job.
Right. And when you're at work, someone will tell you if they need something. Do you know what I mean? Like, if
Yeah.
someone says, actually, take a little bit of a step to your right because the light is better there or something,
Mhm.
of course we will listen to them. But I don't think that that should be the starting place from which our decisions get made. And the thing that your question also reminded me of is you can get a lot of funny advice when you have done a lot of theater and start pursuing and or working on camera about sizing and all kinds of things. And I think that, the most valuable thing that was ever said to me about it was that it's not that one is bigger or smaller, it's that when you're on stage, if you're my scene partner, energetically speaking, I have to reach you, but I have to also reach past you to however far away the back wall is. Whereas on camera, I just have to get to you. But depending on the situation, I might still have to get to you like going like that. Like that does still happen sometimes. And I think that you see a lot of performances and you see even more auditions that got a little funny advice somewhere along the line saying, well, this needs to be tamped down. And then all you're watching is someone tamp down their instincts, which is an upsetting thing to watch.
Well said. Yeah. Yeah, I find that one of the hardest things to watch actually. When you see impulse, you see the impulse, you see that they know what this is, what it's meant to be, and you can tell they're just not quite going to do it. It's so hard to watch. And it's also so hard to take that leap and get over that hump. It's hard.
I think it's different for every person, but what do you think it's about? Do you think it's being scared of looking a certain way or
I do. Or getting it wrong.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I think it is more. And especially in situations where you haven't been given a lot of direction. So if someone hasn't told you ahead of time what the right choice is, then you really can feel like you're going out on a limb and it could just be wildly wrong, you know? But I feel like over and over we see these situations where we would rather see someone have a wildly strange interpretation because you see then that they have such an incredible imagination. You see that they can make a really vivid character and you think, okay, that was maybe not the choice we're going to actually make in the long run. But if I know they can make that strong of choice, chances are they can make this other choice as well. But when you see someone come in and not trust their instincts and not quite go there or not make a choice at all, I think then that makes the creative teams lose a little confidence in them that they're going to be able to bring what's needed. But not having direction and not being kind of told the right answer ahead of time is really hard. I don't know any other job interviews like this.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Cynthia, is the nature of being an actor is being told no 20,000 times, and I think if you let that seep into your self-confidence or seep into the view of yourself, your self-worth, what you bring to the table as an actor, then in the back of your mind, it's like, I'm just going to get told no for this, or what I'm doing is wrong, So what you're saying instead, Oli, is like, no, I'm the solution to your problem. I have 4 different creative ways I could do this for you today. And let's just play. That is the job, is to come and be fully committed to whatever scene you've put in front of me today. And I think that's musical theater, that's TV for sure. But yeah, I think it's that. I think you've got to have like the wherewithal as your own human being to say, okay, I'm just going to go for it. And I'm going to get told 20 times by Royal Pains that you're not quite right for this episode. And it's going to be fine.
If you audition for something 20 times, it would be very easy to, by about time number 4, to think, I must be doing something wrong. And then to possibly start censoring all of your choices, when actually you're probably doing something really right because they keep asking you back, even though you're not quite booking it yet, But that's a tricky mindset to wrap your head around.
I think so too. And I also think it's where lying to myself came in handy, when I would think, I'm not going to audition for this part. I'm going to go do my close up as I would do it on the actual day. Or in a theater audition, I'm going to go give my performance to the best of my ability. I think that allowed me to commit as much as I needed to commit, because when you're on stage and an audience member is loudly unwrapping whatever they're unwrapping, you still have to do the scene. Or if the sound guy on set is eating a sandwich while I'm trying to cry in this scene or whatever, I still have to do the scene. And so I think that, again, it was selfish and it was lying to myself, but it was easier for me to commit and give a full performance and do all of these things when I didn't want to feel like I was auditioning for something later. I wanted to feel like it was happening now. And one thing I do want to say to that is that as I've gotten older, I think I'm also asking myself the question much more, like, what is the story as opposed to what is my performance? And I wonder if that makes me a little less nervous and allows me to commit to something a little bit more, because whatever outlandish story it is, I just have to be part of telling the story. I can't really worry about my performance as much. And I think that has been helpful for me in a lot of ways, reframing things. And it also makes you less result oriented. And I think that it allows me to explore some different things a little bit more actively than getting nailed down to, like, well, the way I say this line is like this, and I do this gesture when I sing this. But I also wonder, we're talking about these performances that feel a little held back or feel a little muted in some way. And I wonder at this point, it's not true for every single part in the world, but I do think it is possible that I believe something along the lines of, you can't get to the really great stuff without risking being really, really bad in some way. And
so true.
And I think that I had a casting director once say to me, not about anything I was doing, I ran into them after a day of auditions and I said, how did it go? And the thing that they said that I think is so huge was, they just said, you should never worry about being bad. You should just worry about being boring. And I think that's kind of amazing, because good or bad, kind of like you were saying, Cynthia, is kind of up for grabs, because someone committing to something, you might think it's bad and I might think it's good, but they definitely committed to something. And we can shape that in some way. Whereas boring is a little bit more cut and dry.
Yeah.
And someone taking a swing at something, someone will think it's good and someone will think it's bad, but they'll find the right people to work with because they committed to something, and that'll attract the right people in the right situations, hopefully. Whereas again, boring is a bit more subjective, maybe.
Amen.
There's no place for boring.
No.
I mean, You see it all over the place, but
Yeah. Unfortunately, people have made a lot of places for boring, but
yeah.
not in entertainment, folks. Not in entertainment. I think that's really I love that insight, and I think that's a great thing to keep in mind. Any other final thoughts of last piece of wisdom, advice for
You
anyone
know,
who is thinking about trying to move into this space?
that's a really good question. And, like all of us, I think my advice would differ hour by hour. I just reread Harriet Walter's book on acting, which is called Other People's Shoes. And she signed it to me in Ann Arbor when she was there with the Royal Shakespeare Company in 2007. And it's my favorite book on acting. I think it's amazing. And I kind of alluded to it a little bit ago, maybe, but she does say something along the lines of the most important thing is to find your people. And I think that there's no way to do that if you're not fully committing to your version of yourself, whatever that means in that moment. And it's Harriet's advice more than it is mine, but I guess that's the thing I've been thinking about a lot lately because I do feel, I mean, my career, which is a word that I feel uncomfortable using, like it's been a mess. It's been all over the place and it's been big ups and downs and whatever. But I do think Harriet Walter is dead on, basically. And I think that the only way to find your people, as she says, is to do your best to honor your vision of something and your take on something. And it's much easier said than done. And it's led to, me coming in with my ideas on something led to a lot of people not being particularly interested in having me around, but it led me to some unbelievable people wanting to have me around, and those were the right people for me. And I think that if my particular career had played out the way that I imagined it when I was 21 years old, I don't think it ever would have made me as happy as the career that I have now. And I feel so fortunate for that. And I guess I say that because that would be my hope for everybody else. And again, I think Harriet Walter is onto something in that that's how you have to operate. Maybe that's the biggest question we should be asking.
Be yourself and find your people. I love that.
Olli, thank you so much.
Thank you
This
so
was
much for being with us.
so insightful, so helpful.
Thank you.
I really appreciate all of your insight. And Olli, where can people find you online? And if they want to work with you, how can they get in touch?
I'm on Instagram. That's the only platform I'm on. And I have a website, which is just myname.com. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
We'll link all of that in the episode description today so folks can get in touch and see all the cool things that you continue to do. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a screenshot wherever you're listening, share it on Instagram, tag us when you do at B-Way Vocal Coach, share this episode with a friend who might enjoy it, and please leave us a review. We love to hear from you about what is resonating as you listen to the podcast. And if you're ready to take your next step, but you aren't entirely sure what that should be, then take our quiz. We'll strategize with you to outline a roadmap to your unique goals. Plus, from there, you can book a free consult and chat with us. Visit bwayvocalcoach.com/take the quiz. We can't wait to hear your story and help you take the next step in your career.